All right, so let's jump into another deep dive. This time we're looking at Max Heindel and his Rosicrucian Secrets of Soul Evolution and Cosmic Law, a book that promises quite a lot, wouldn't you say?
It definitely grabs your attention with
Pretty bold claim right there on the cover.
And to add to that, we'll also be weaving in some of Heindel's earlier work, the Rosicrucian Mysteries.
that one lays some of the groundwork for the ideas he expands on in the Rosicrucian Code, so it's helpful to have both in mind.
Totally. So for anyone listening, we're essentially setting out on this deep dive to explore the core of Heindel's Rosicrucian philosophy. We want to see what he had to say about how humans evolve spiritually, what he believed about the true nature of reality, not just the physical world we see, and his view on the composition of humanity, life, death, and the afterlife. All pretty big topics.
Absolutely. The fundamental questions.
And we'll be doing this directly from Heindel's own words. We've got excerpts from the preface, table of contents, and some key chapters from both books.
Excellent. So let's get started.
Okay, so right off the bat, Heindel dives into the concept of the Rosicrucian Order and the Rosicrucian Fellowship, which he founded. And one of the first things he lays out is this idea that our spiritual development isn't just happening randomly, it's guided.
Right. He believed there are these highly evolved beings. He calls them exalted beings, almost like cosmic mentors who oversee humanity's progress. He even connects them to the recording angels mentioned in Christian teachings.
So kind of like guardian angels, but on a much grander scale. And according to Heindel, they're guiding us along this evolutionary path, but not all of us are at the same stage, right? He uses this analogy of Earth being like a massive training school.
Yes. I love that analogy. And in this school, there's a whole range of students. You've got those he calls savages, who have very basic primal understanding of the divine. And then you've got those who have progressed to a much more sophisticated understanding of God in the spiritual realms.
And Heindel talks about these spiritual waves that humanity goes through, followed by periods where materialism takes center stage. He believed this ebb and flow is necessary for our development, both in terms of our hearts and our minds. He gives examples like Confucianism, Buddhism, and even Pythagorean philosophy, placing them around 600 BC as a peak of one of these spiritual waves.
It's like a pendulum swing between emphasizing the heart and emphasizing the mind, each one informing and balancing the other.
And then as these spiritual impulses move westward, Heindel points to the rise of Christianity in the West, in what's often referred to as the Dark Ages. That period was marked by a strong focus on faith and religious authority, at least in Western Europe.
Right. And then, as we move into the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, there's a shift towards reason and a questioning of traditional religious beliefs. Heindel saw this as a natural part of the cycle, where periods of spiritual intensity are followed by periods of intellectual inquiry and skepticism. The key, he says, is to find the balance, to integrate the heart and the mind, so we don't end up with a cold, sterile materialism or blind faith without understanding.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Heindel claims that these great beings, these guiding forces, anticipated the rise of materialism that came with the scientific revolution. And to counteract it, they initiated this Rosicrucian movement, starting as far back as the Middle Ages.
That's a pretty intriguing idea.
He specifically mentions figures like Paracelsus, Boehme, Francis Bacon, and even Shakespeare as being part of this movement, sending out what he calls soul-stirring vibrations from their spiritual center at midnight.
So it's like these individuals were acting as conduits for a higher spiritual influence, trying to steer humanity back towards a more balanced path.
Exactly. And Heindel goes on to say that as we moved into the 20th century, there was this growing realization that religion and science needed to find some common ground.
Yeah.
People's hearts, he said, could grasp religious concepts intuitively, but their intellects often struggled with things like the Immaculate Conception or the Crucifixion because they didn't seem to fit with the laws of nature as science understood them.
So there was this disconnect between faith and reason, between what the heart felt and what the mind could logically accept.
Right. And the Rosicrucians recognized this imbalance. They wanted to present a system of spiritual understanding that resonated with both the heart and the mind, a system that acknowledged the importance of both faith and reason. And this is where Max Heindel comes in.
He claimed to have been chosen as a messenger for this new age, tasked with delivering teachings that could bridge this gap between science and religion.
But it wasn't just handed to him, was it?
No, not at all. He describes this whole process of preparation and testing. He even mentions that the Rosicrucian Order's first choice for a messenger ultimately failed a crucial test after years of training.
Wow.
And then Heindel presented himself as the second choice and underwent his own rigorous training under the guidance of this invisible brotherhood. He claimed this led him to what he considered the ultimate answer to life's biggest questions, which he eventually published as the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception in 1909.
A pretty bold statement.
It is. But Heindel believed that book marked a turning point in occult literature. And he said the positive reception he received suggested that people were genuinely finding answers in it. He also made it very clear that the Rosicrucian perspective views all major religions as being divinely inspired.
So it's not about rejecting existing religions.
Not at all. He saw them as different expressions of the same underlying spiritual truth, each tailored to the specific needs and capacities of the people they were given to. He even explained that what works for one culture or time period might not work for another. That's why he felt it was important to present a system specifically suited for Westerners who, he believed, weren't necessarily attuned to the practices of Eastern traditions.
And that brings us to the Rosicrucian Fellowship, which Heindel founded in 1909. He believed this organization was a herald of the coming Aquarian age. You know, the astrological idea that as the sun moves through the constellation of Aquarius, it ushers in a new era of spiritual and intellectual advancement for humanity.
And he was quite optimistic about the potential of this Aquarian age.
Yeah.
He used a striking image, saying that just as heat radiates outward from a fire, this Aquarian influence would elevate the entire Earth's vibration, leading to breakthroughs we can barely conceive of right now. He even pointed to the rapid technological advancements of his time, things like X-rays, telephones, airplanes, and submarines, as early signs of this Aquarian energy at work.
And he didn't stop there, did he? He made some pretty mind-blowing predictions about the abilities humans might develop in the Aquarian age. Things like being able to see through solid objects, communicate telepathically across vast distances, even move through fire unharmed. Powers that seem almost superhuman.
It is remarkable. And he even suggested these powers would be based on the development of latent senses within us, going far beyond any technology we could invent. But there was a catch, right?
Oh yeah, a big one. He warned that unless humanity also cultivated a deep sense of altruism, a genuine love and compassion for others, these powers could be misused in incredibly destructive ways. He saw this ethical dimension as absolutely crucial alongside any spiritual or intellectual advancement.
He wasn't just promoting some kind of esoteric power trip. He believed true progress involved developing our moral compass alongside our spiritual and mental capacities.
And he went on to distinguish between two types of individuals who are drawn to these spiritual pursuits: the occultists and the mystics. He described occultists as being primarily driven by an intellectual curiosity about hidden knowledge. They're fascinated by the mysteries, the symbolism, the deeper mechanics of the spiritual realms.
It's like a more head-centered approach, a thirst for knowledge and understanding.
Right. And then you have the mystics, whom Heindel characterized as being motivated by a profound inner longing for union with the divine. They're less focused on intellectual understanding and more on cultivating devotion and experiencing that direct connection with the spiritual source.
He saw that as a path of the heart, driven by love and a yearning for communion with the divine.
And he was careful to point out the potential pitfalls of both approaches. He believed that an occultist who develops spiritual powers without a strong ethical foundation risks misusing them, potentially even slipping into what he called black magic, with all its negative consequences. And a mystic, while guided by love, could still stumble due to a lack of intellectual understanding, potentially becoming entangled in spiritual forces they don't fully comprehend.
So it's like he was saying that both paths have their challenges and that a balanced approach is essential.
Right. And that balance involves cultivating both wisdom and compassion, intellect, and love. Now, shifting gears a bit, Heindel spends a good chunk of his work addressing what he calls the problem of life and its solution. And he starts with that age-old question: what's the meaning of life? Why are we here? What's it all about?
The big questions.
And he says those who have genuinely found an answer, a satisfying explanation for the mystery of existence, feel compelled to share what they've discovered, to help others find their own way to understanding. It's not about forcing beliefs on anyone, but about illuminating a path that others can choose to follow.
Like offering a map rather than dictating the destination.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that the Rosicrucian teachings come from what he calls the Great Western Mystery School, this ancient lineage of spiritual wisdom passed down through the ages. He says these teachings are supported by the consistent experiences of countless spiritual seers throughout history, as well as his own investigations into the unseen realms.
So it's a system with a long history and a solid experiential foundation.
But here's the important part. He also acknowledges that he could be wrong, that he might have misinterpreted what he saw in the spiritual realms, where he says illusions are rampant. So he urges the student, the seeker, to think critically, to reason things out for themselves, and not just blindly accept what he's saying. He basically says, if you're going to be wrong, at least be wrong based on your own reasoning, not just because you took my word for it.
That's a really important point. He's encouraging people to engage their own critical thinking and discernment, not just blindly follow any teacher or system.
Absolutely. And then he lays out three primary theories that attempt to answer this fundamental question of life's purpose. The first is the materialistic theory. And as Heindel presents it, this theory claims that life is just this brief biological occurrence between birth and death, that there's no higher intelligence or purpose to it all. The mind, according to this view, is simply a product of the brain, and when the body dies, everything just ends, lights out.
It's a pretty bleak perspective, isn't it?
It can be, but Heindel counters this by pointing to what he saw as mounting scientific evidence for a spiritual dimension to existence. He mentions cases where people were clinically dead, their hearts stopped, but they were revived and reported having vivid memories of events that happened while they were seemingly unconscious. He even cites prominent scientists of his time, like Sir Oliver Lodge, Camille Flammarion, and Lombroso, who, based on their research, concluded that consciousness persists after physical death.
So he was trying to show that even science, which often takes a materialistic stance, was starting to provide evidence for a spiritual reality.
Right. And he argued that these findings were actually consistent with established scientific principles, like the conservation of matter and energy. He said if mind is a form of energy, it wouldn't just disappear, it would transform, continue to exist in some form. So he saw the materialistic theory as being incomplete, failing to account for a whole range of evidence.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the second theory he presents?
The second one he calls the theory of theology. And in his representation of it, this theory proposes that God creates a unique soul for each individual at the moment of birth. And this soul then experiences a short earthly life before returning to God for an eternal judgment. Depending on its actions during that brief earthly existence, the soul is sent to either an everlasting heaven or an everlasting hell.
So it's a more traditional religious view of things, with a focus on divine judgment and an afterlife determined by our earthly deeds.
Right. But Heindel offers a Rosicrucian interpretation of this, making it clear that the body, the soul, and the spirit are distinct entities, not interchangeable terms. And he introduces this concept of the breath record, which is basically the idea that with every breath we take, we're internally recording impressions of our experiences and the world around us. This breath record, he says, is what forms the soul.
So it's like a continuous recording of our thoughts, emotions, and actions imprinted onto our very being.
Exactly. And he goes on to say that when we perform good deeds, acts of kindness, generosity, compassion, these generate feelings of pleasure within us. And through the breath record, these positive impressions are incorporated into the spirit, adding to its power and growth over many lifetimes. So in a sense, these accumulated records of our good actions are what constitute the soul which is saved. They become immortal through their union with the eternal spirit and contribute to our ongoing spiritual evolution.
So it's not that the soul itself is judged, but rather the quality of our actions and the impressions they leave on our spirit.
Right. And on the flip side, the impressions of our negative actions, the things we do that cause harm to ourselves or others, those are also recorded through our breath at the time they occur. And the pain we experience as a result of those actions prompts the spirit to expel these negative records in a process Heindel calls purgatory.
So it's like a self-purification process.
Right. And because these negative records can't exist independently of the life-giving spirit, they eventually disintegrate. Heindel saw this as aligning with the biblical concept of the soul that sinneth, it shall die. But he also emphasized that the memory of the suffering we experience during this purification process remains with the spirit as conscience, serving as a deterrent against repeating those harmful actions in future lives.
That's an interesting take on the concept of sin and redemption.
Yeah.
It's not about eternal punishment, but about learning from our mistakes and purifying ourselves.
Right. And here's the key difference between this theory and the previous one. While some religious interpretations suggest that the soul's immortality is conditional upon our actions, Heindel doesn't say that about the spirit. He sees the spirit as uncreated and eternal, meaning there's no such thing as a soul being completely lost or condemned for eternity.
Okay, so he's basically saying that everyone, regardless of their actions, will eventually find their way back to a state of harmony and union with the divine source.
Exactly. Now, that brings us to the third theory, the one that Heindel himself endorsed, the theory of rebirth. This theory posits that each individual spirit is essentially a spark of the universal spirit, containing within it the potential for all divine attributes, much like a tiny acorn holds within it the blueprint for a mighty oak tree. And through numerous earthly lives, these latent spiritual powers gradually unfold and manifest as we gain experience and evolve.
So it's not about being judged and sent to a fixed afterlife, but about this ongoing journey of growth and learning through multiple lifetimes.
Exactly. And Heindel stressed that no spirit is ever truly lost. Everyone, he said, will eventually achieve a state of perfection and reunite with the divine source, bringing with them all the wisdom and experience they've accumulated along the way. He even includes this beautiful passage where he describes the spirit's journey as an everlasting song, a melody that continues even through the silence of death.
That's lovely imagery. And he connected this idea of rebirth to the broader concept of evolution, didn't he? Seeing it as a gradual process of unfolding with periods of activity and rest.
He did. He compared Earth to a school that we return to life after life to learn new lessons and further our development, with death and the time between lives serving as necessary intervals for assimilation and renewal, like sleep after a long day of learning.
And the core principle here, from the Rosicrucian perspective, is that the only real obstacle to our progress is ignorance. And the only true path to liberation is through the application of knowledge. It's a journey of learning and growth. And perfection isn't something we achieve in a single lifetime. It's the cumulative result of this ongoing process.
That makes sense. And I think it resonates with a lot of people's intuitive feeling that one lifetime just isn't enough to learn and experience everything we're meant to.
Especially when you consider how much diversity and complexity there is in the universe.
Okay, so let's move on to Heindel's description of the visible and invisible worlds. Now, he starts with this idea that Earth and the solar system are made up of different grades of matter, some of which we can perceive with our ordinary senses, while others can only be seen through spiritual vision or expanded states of consciousness. And he uses a great analogy to illustrate this. He compares it to an egg.
Oh, I remember that one. The yolk, the white, and the shell.
Right. Exactly. He says the visible Earth, the physical world we see around us, is like the yolk of the egg. Then, surrounding that, you have the desire world, which is a finer, more subtle grade of matter, comparable to the egg white. And finally, encompassing both of those, you have the world of thought, which he compares to the outer shell of the egg.
That's a really helpful image for visualizing these different realms.
Totally. So, starting with the physical world, the chemical region, Heindel says it's made up of solids, liquids, gases, the basic building blocks of matter as we know it. This also includes what scientists have theorized as the ether, a subtle medium thought to permeate all of space and matter.
And then you have the desire world, which is where our feelings, emotions, and desires reside. Heindel says it's this invisible realm that interpenetrates the physical world, and he argues it's essential for the movement and change of all forms. He compares it to the steam that powers a steam engine, or the emotional energy that fuels our actions.
And beyond that, you have the world of thought, which Heindel believed is the source of mind stuff, the very substance from which our thoughts and inventions arise. He makes an important point here that this division into different worlds isn't just some abstract philosophical notion. He sees it as a logically necessary way to explain the diverse phenomena we observe in life. There are things that just can't be explained solely in terms of the physical world.
Right, like intuition, creativity, spiritual experiences. Those point to something beyond the material realm.
Exactly. Then he goes into more detail about the etheric region, which he places within the physical world itself. He describes it as a finer grade of matter than the chemical elements we're familiar with, and he identifies 4 distinct types: the chemical ether, the life ether, the light ether, and the reflecting ether.
Those sound intriguing. What do they do?
Well, according to Heindel, the chemical ether is involved in maintaining the physical forms of things, like plants and animals. The life ether is responsible for growth, reproduction, and the vital life force that animates living beings. The light ether transmits solar energy and is involved in the processes of sight and color perception. And the reflecting ether, he says, acts as a kind of cosmic memory bank, recording all impressions and events that occur in the physical world.
Wow, that's fascinating. So it's like these ethers are the invisible forces that orchestrate the physical world?
Exactly. And it's interesting that he connected these ethers to the historical understanding of elemental spirits, the gnomes, undines, sylphs, and salamanders that were associated with the elements of earth, water, air, and fire. He suggests that these spirits might be related to these fundamental etheric forces that operate in nature. He even briefly mentions angels, like the Archangel Gabriel, as operating within these realms.
So it's like he was trying to reconcile ancient wisdom with modern scientific understanding.
And now for the desire world. When it comes to experiencing this realm through spiritual sight, Heindel describes it as this vast dynamic space filled with what he calls force matter, something that's both force and matter at the same time. And he points out this curious characteristic that multiple things can occupy the same physical space in the desire world, which is something that would be impossible in our physical realm.
So it's like a different set of rules apply there.
Right. And he also contrasts the nature of matter and force in the physical world, where things tend to resist change, with the desire world, where constant motion and transformation are the norm. It's like a realm of pure energy and emotion in a constant state of flux.
And what about language in the desire world? Did he say anything about that?
Oh, yeah. He mentioned that the lower levels of the desire world actually mirror the diversity of languages we have here on Earth, which he thought made language skills quite valuable for those who act as invisible helpers in the spiritual realms. But he also acknowledged that earthly languages are limited, imperfect, and prone to misunderstandings, even in the spiritual world.
I can imagine. It's challenging enough to communicate clearly in our own language.
And then he moves on to the world of thought, describing the transition into this realm as passing through the great silence. This is the realm of pure thought and archetypes, where the underlying patterns and ideas behind everything in the physical world reside.
It's like the blueprint of reality.
Exactly. And he divides this realm into two regions: the region of concrete thought and the region of abstract thought. The region of concrete thought, he says, is the realm of crystallized thought, where everything we see in the physical world exists as a pure idea. Our houses, our tools, our bodies, all of it is essentially thought that's been condensed and made manifest in the physical world. He introduces this concept of a keynote sound that emanates from every form in this region, a sound that continuously creates and sustains the form. He calls it the voice of the silence.
So it's like everything is vibrating at a specific frequency that determines its form and structure.
Precisely. And then there's the region of abstract thought, which he describes as the realm of pure, unformed ideas, the chaos from which the cosmos emerges. He says this is where original ideas are born, where inspiration and creative impulses originate. And in this realm, truth is self-evident, but as it descends into the denser realms of matter, it becomes obscured and distorted.
So it's like we're trying to perceive this perfect eternal truth through a veil of materiality.
Exactly. And that's why he connected the pursuit of spiritual understanding to the desire for liberation, for a clear and undistorted perception of this underlying truth. He even saw philosophy and science as playing a valuable role in helping us refine our understanding and see through this veil of illusion.
So it's not about abandoning reason or intellectual inquiry, but about using them as tools to refine our understanding of the spiritual realms.
Right. Now let's move on to his exploration of what makes up a human being, the constitution of man. Heindel says that in addition to the physical body we're all familiar with, we also have a vital body, a desire body, and a mind. These are the invisible components that allow us to interact with the different planes of existence he's described.
So it's like we're multidimensional beings with bodies corresponding to each of these realms.
Exactly. And he goes into quite a bit of detail about each of these bodies. The vital body, he says, is made of ether and is an exact duplicate of our physical body, except it extends slightly beyond the physical form. And its primary function is to absorb and distribute the vital life force that emanates from the sun. This life force enters the physical body through the spleen and is then transformed into a pale, rose-colored vital fluid that circulates through the nervous system.
So it's like the vital body is the energy system that animates the physical body.
Right. And he even talks about 3 different types of cosmic rays that influence us: solar rays, stellar rays, and lunar rays. He says the solar rays are associated with spiritual illumination, the stellar rays with intellectual and moral development, and the lunar rays with physical growth and vitality. He also connects these rays to the spinal nerves and warns against untrained attempts to awaken dormant spiritual faculties within the vital body, as this could have negative consequences.
That makes sense. If you're dealing with powerful energies, you need to approach them with knowledge and caution.
Absolutely. And then there's the desire body, which he describes as being composed of desire stuff, a more fluid and less organized substance than ether. It appears as an ovoid cloud that extends beyond the physical body. And he says it's less structured than the vital body because it's a more recent acquisition in our evolutionary development. He talks about the constant swirling motions and vortices within the desire body, and he explains that it displays a whole spectrum of colors, far more than we can see in the physical world. These colors, he says, are constantly changing and reflect a person's character, temperament, and even the influence of their ruling star at birth.
That's fascinating. So it's like our desires and emotions literally color our aura.
And he suggests that the evolutionary precursor of the desire body in the physical world is the pineal gland, which he saw as a localized organ of feeling. He also emphasizes that every particle within the desire body is incredibly sensitive to vibrations, similar to how our physical senses perceive sight, sound, and touch.
So it's like a super sensitive sensory organ that picks up on subtle energies and emotions.
Right. And finally, he briefly mentions the mind as a more recently evolved component of our being, appearing as a cloudy thought form that interpenetrates the other bodies.
So it's like the mind is the bridge between the spiritual and physical realms, allowing us to translate thought into action and experience.
Right. And now we come to Heindel's perspective on life and death. He starts by distinguishing between two general types of people, those whose dense physical and vital bodies are tightly interwoven, making them generally unaware of the spiritual realms, and those with a looser connection between these bodies, who tend to be more sensitive to the spiritual world. And he further categorizes these sensitive individuals into negative mediums and positive clairvoyants, or invisible helpers.
So it's like there's a spectrum of sensitivity to the spiritual realms, with some people being completely oblivious, while others are more attuned to those subtle energies.
Exactly, and he explains that mediums, due to their passive receptivity, can be used by disembodied spirits seeking to temporarily manifest in the physical world. In contrast, invisible helpers are those who have consciously developed the ability to detach their vital bodies and operate in the etheric realms to assist others. He gives examples like the tingling sensation you might feel when blood flow returns to a limb that has fallen asleep, or the experience of near drowning, where people report feeling like they're floating above their bodies watching events unfold. He explains that the prickly feeling when regaining consciousness is the etheric body merging back with the physical.
So it's like we have the potential to separate from our physical bodies, even while we're still alive.
Right. And he goes on to describe the process of sleep as a nightly occurrence, where our desire body and mind leave the denser physical and vital bodies to find restoration and process experiences in the desire world. Then he gets into the big topic of death, asserting that in most cases, it's not a random accident, but a natural transition that occurs either when we've consistently missed opportunities for growth or when we've lived a full life and learned what we were meant to. He does acknowledge exceptions for things like murder or accidents caused by carelessness.
So he's saying there's a kind of natural order to things, a time for us to enter this physical realm and a time to leave it.
Right. And he emphasizes the importance of free will in relation to negative actions, saying that those who cause harm create a karmic debt that needs to be balanced, which can lead to suffering in future lives. But he also points out that there are instances where a life might be extended due to exceptionally good deeds, where the individual's continued presence in the physical world is deemed beneficial for others.
Like a cosmic balancing act.
Exactly. And then he describes the experience of death itself, saying that the most common occurrence is an overwhelming pall of great darkness that envelops the individual just before transitioning into the superphysical realms. However, he also mentions situations where the dying person sees both the physical and spiritual world simultaneously and may even see deceased loved ones awaiting them. He even relays what he claims is a spirit message from the late Professor William James of Harvard University, who purportedly described death as simply falling asleep and then awakening in the morning, knowing that all is well.
That's a comforting thought.
It is. But Heindel goes on to highlight a critical period of about 3.5 days immediately following physical death. This, he says, is a transitional phase for the departing spirit that requires peace and quiet. He strongly advises against things like post-mortem examinations, embalming, and cremation during this time, as he believes they can disturb the spirit's transition and cause unnecessary pain.
So it's like the spirit needs time and space to detach from the physical body and adjust to its new state of being.
Exactly. And then comes the panorama of a past life, which unfolds as the silver cord, the energetic link between the physical and etheric bodies, is severed. This life review, which can last anywhere from 1 to 3.5 days, is considered crucial for the individual's post-mortem existence. He addresses the common question of why we don't consciously remember past lives by explaining the concept of subconscious memory, comparing it to a photographer's exposed but undeveloped plate. He says that the breath record imprints our experiences onto a sensitized atom within the heart, which he refers to as the book of the recording angel. The reflecting ether of the vital body then acts as a lens for this life review, essentially etching it into the desire body, which will serve as our vehicle in the realms of purgatory and the first heaven.
So it's like our life experiences are literally imprinted onto our subtle bodies.
Precisely. And he goes on to say that the depth and clarity of this etching directly influence the intensity of our experiences in purgatory and the strength of our conscience in future lives. If there are disturbances or traumatic experiences at the time of death, this can result in a shallower etching and a less fruitful post-mortem existence, potentially hindering future spiritual growth. But he also mentions that there are beneficent powers that may intervene and compensate in such cases.
So it's like there's a cosmic safety net in place to ensure that even if things go wrong during the death process, the individual's spiritual progress isn't completely derailed.
Right. Then he describes purgatory, which he places in the lower regions of the desire world. This is where the spirit experiences the pain and consequences of its past wrongdoings. But it's not seen as punishment, but rather as a necessary process of purifying and transmuting negative energies into positive conscience. He says that upon awakening in the desire world after the life review, there's often a sense of relief. Addressing the seeming contradiction of accounts where individuals in purgatory seem to be engaging in earthly activities like cooking, cleaning, or even eating, he draws an analogy to the concept of dreaming true from George du Maurier's novel Peter Ibbotson. He explains that individuals might vividly re-experience scenes from their past lives, and since the desire world is a realm of thought and emotion, these experiences can feel incredibly real. He also mentions the Rosicrucian practice of nightly reverse review as a way to proactively purify oneself emotionally and strengthen the conscience, potentially mitigating the intensity of purgatory after death.
It's like taking responsibility for your actions and cleaning up your emotional baggage as you go, rather than waiting for a massive karmic reckoning after death.
Right. And then there's the first heaven, which is located in the higher regions of the desire world. Here, the life panorama unfolds again, but this time focusing on the good deeds, acts of kindness, and expressions of love from the past life. The spirit relives the feelings of gratitude it both gave and received, and these positive emotions are assimilated into the spirit as fuel for future growth and altruism. He emphasizes that purgatory is not a place of eternal punishment, but a cleansing process that allows us to be reborn with a greater capacity for good. He even touches upon the unique experience of those who commit suicide, suggesting they experience a dreadful gnawing pain in the first heaven for the duration of their intended lifespan because their life archetype lacks a physical anchor. He contrasts this with the joyful existence of children in the first heaven, emphasizing the importance of their play with colors, which he believes influences their moral development. He even suggests that infant mortality might have deeper karmic causes related to the life panorama and could be a form of compensation for those who didn't fully experience that review.
So even in death, there's a sense of purpose and meaning, a continuation of learning and growth.
Exactly. Then we move on to the second heaven, which is located in the region of concrete thought. This is where the spirit sheds the desire body, which persists for a while as a semi-conscious shell and enters what Heindel calls the Great Silence, followed by an experience of celestial harmonies, the world of tone. He emphasizes that this is the first truly spiritual realm we consciously enter after death, a realm where creativity truly begins. He connects the law of causation to this realm, explaining that the thoughts and intentions we hold during our earthly life shape our experience in the second heaven. Those who cultivated altruistic and creative aspirations will find themselves in a beautiful and harmonious environment, while those who focused on material gain or selfish pursuits will experience a more barren and limited existence.
So we literally create our own afterlife through our thoughts and actions.
Right. And finally, there's the third heaven, located in the region of abstract thought. This realm, for most individuals, serves as a place of waiting and contemplation with a limited degree of conscious activity, but he points out its importance as the source of original ideas, philanthropic visions, and spiritual inspiration for those of the